We thank you so much for tuning in to our special alternative Super Bowl night with the Objector Church. We do this live webcast each week, Sunday evenings. All the details you can find out at our website, objector.church. We're so glad you're tuning in. And tonight, of course, debating about starting this program tonight because of it being the Super Bowl. And we knew a lot of our regular viewers might not be watching. However, we thought about it and realized there's some people that don't like football. And that's a rare variety of person here in Oklahoma, but in many other parts of the country, people are not as much into football. Secondly, this year there's some major ethical issues a lot of people are dealing with. Questions of whether you can support the NFL, given its history of not addressing player head injuries. Whether we can support the NFL, given their way they've treated Colin Kaepernick and others who have refused to stand up for the national anthem at this time of great racism in this country and police brutality. There's some tough questions, and I know a lot of you out there may be in the camp of saying, I've had enough of it for this year. And yet I also know some of you do watch the Super Bowl and do watch the NFL and may have these questions, but also at the end of the day, you can't pull yourself away. And I want to say there's no judgment tonight about that. In fact, I spent a few minutes at a Super Bowl party myself, making an appearance for social sake. So I get it. Really, it's unfortunate to me, really, that this event has so many problems when it is, as a nation, and as a society, it's good to have moments of spectacle, of festivity, of people uniting about something, even if it's just a ball game. And so, anyway, I guess I'm trying to say I get it. There's no judgment here, and appreciate you for watching this later. All of that said, I do think the Super Bowl itself gives us a great opportunity to talk tonight about the subject of ethics, what it means to be a good person, but particularly, how do we make sense of ethics in our context as religious humanists? It's a great question. By the way, before we get into the topic, I have a couple things I want to do. First of all, I want to welcome everyone who's watching and remind everyone you can post comments if you're watching this right now live on Facebook Live. And definitely please share it if you can. If you have any comments, questions, thoughts, please post them as we go along. Also, along with you have comments, I'll try to get to them as I can. By the way, hello, Chris. Thank you for tuning in. And I know Jeff and Rena are probably on here and probably some other folks. So if you have comments along the way, feel free to share them. Also, I want to say a special shout out to any new viewers who are watching us who are involved with Courage to Resist or supporters of Courage to Resist. Courage to Resist, we're really excited that they shared some information about the church through their mailings and whatnot this week. And so if any of you are joining us, I want to thank you so much. For anyone who doesn't know, though, the Objector Church is the fiscal sponsor of Courage to Resist, meaning that our nonprofit status covers Courage in their work. And the work of Courage to Resist is dear to our heart because it deals with issues of conscience, of war resistance, and some really important things. So we're going to talk a little more about Courage to Resist towards the end of the program. But first, I want to mention, well, not so much mention, but we're going to do a little bit of ritual. This community, by the way, I should mention for those of you who are new, this is a religious humanist community, meaning that we are people that deal with questions of traditionally dealt with in religion, issues of identity, purpose, worth, ethics, morality, all those issues. But we do it from the standpoint of humanism, which has a perspective of looking at humans being at the center point of their own destiny. In other words, human beings are in the driver's seat. And so it's up to us what we make of the world. And it's also up to us to look out for each other. Now, I should mention, as a community, we have members who are more traditionally religious, who believe in God, who believe in deities. We have members who do not. But within all that diversity, what we have in common is our desire to deal with the real stuff, to deal with the big questions, to live ethical lives. And finally, our third principle is peace and social justice. In other words, we want the world to be one that is peaceful, that doesn't have war and violence, and that has fairness, sustainability, justice right here on Earth. And so that's what we're about. another thing we do as a community, we try to provide some ritual, particularly for people who are not traditionally religious. Now, for myself, I have more of the religious orientation, and I'm involved in other communities that are more religiously oriented in the more traditional sense. But we have members who are not. But a lot of people I've talked to and have dealt with over the years, even who may reject elements of religion, miss a sense of ritual, miss the idea of these grounding things that help us to feel more grounded and connected with the world around us. And one very common symbol of many world faiths is that of a light, of a candle. And so we have a little ritual we've been doing now for a few weeks, and hoping it'll catch on. We light a candle at the beginning of our time together, and then I read a prayer from the Book of Blessings by Marcia Falk. It's a version of the Shema prayer in Hebrew. I do the first paragraph in Hebrew, the rest in English. I do change one word to reflect the more universal nature of what we're about. And those I'm addressing those watching as kavura, or congregation. But other than that, it's the same prayer from Marcia Falk's book. So I light the candle, we say the blessing, take a moment to slow down, to take a deep breath and to recenter, and then we move into the conversation. So we'll start with the candle. When we're lighting this candle, we're reminding ourselves of, in the midst of all the darkness that may be around us, the hard times, that there is light. And that sometimes what we can do is we can do our part. Lighting a candle may not be much, but it's something, and we need to do it. So, candle is now lit. Now let's all have our blessing. Shema kavura le'olat alafei panim melo olam shekinata ribuei panei ekad. Hear, O congregation, the divine abounds everywhere and dwells in everything. The many are one. Loving life in its mysterious source with all my heart and all my spirit, all my senses and strength, I take upon myself and into myself these promises. To care for the earth and those who live upon it, to pursue justice and peace, to love kindness and compassion. I will teach this to our children throughout the passage of the day as I dwell in my home and as I go on my journey, from the time I rise until I fall asleep. And may my actions be faithful to my words, that our children's children may live to know truth and kindness have embraced, peace and justice have kissed, and are one. And so may it be. Okay, well, that was our time, a little bit of ritual. By the way, in a future episode, we may talk more about ritual, what it looks like, why it functions the way it does, the roles of it in more traditional religious contexts, the roles of it in other contexts. So if you have thoughts, questions about the idea of ritual, I'd love to hear what you wonder, what you question. Shoot them to me at james@objector.church. Also, one more thing before we get into the bulk of our main program today, I want to mention, if you like what you're hearing, please go to our website. It is, again, objector.church. There's information on how you can donate to support our work, information on membership. We're going to have a lot more information on that in the coming weeks. We're still working on some details, and a lot of other things going on. So please check us out, and of course, follow us on social media. Okay, all that out of the way, let's get to our conversation now about ethics, about morality. Some pretty big loaded words for us. And I mentioned earlier from the Super Bowl, these ethical issues. In this case, in the big picture, whether we watch a football game or not, it's not the big ethical dilemma of the world. But I picked that as an idea because it may be less emotionally loaded for most of us. It isn't something that's going to affect our life one way or another in any kind of big way. But it's an example of the decisions we make every day. Of what do we do when the things that we are engaged in, the things we're supporting, may not line up with what we say? And at the end of the day, where do we decide what is right and what is wrong? Well, for a lot of people, again, I came from a very conservative religious tradition. There are many good things about that. I've talked about that some in the past. One of the negative things was it focused a lot on black and white, absolute rules of morality. And the problem is, my experience, and a lot of people, there is this dissonance sometimes of what the complexities of life don't line up. So, I don't know, that's, by the way, I want to mention real quick, Jeff Patterson just posted, he said, wasn't able to connect via the Zoom app. Hopefully, if other folks are having issues with Zoom, Also, they'll find the Facebook Live. So anyway, if any of you are still watching on Zoom, if you're watching, jump over to Facebook Live if you're having problems watching us over there. Whatever reason, the sync between these two programs has been iffy lately, so we'll keep working on it. Also, I got another, let me pull that up again. Jeff wants to know, which team does God say is going to win the Super Bowl? Well, I got to admit, this is my answer. If God talked to me, I'd hope he'd say something more important than who's winning this game. But anyway, I don't know if God talks to us or if there is a God. I mean, I lean in a little more religious direction, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of mystery. So anyway, it's a funny question, but actually a serious answer, and that is that it is a mystery of how much, if the divine exists, how much does the divine interfere with the world? How much does the divine not do that? And again, the existence of the divine at all. Again, this particular webcast, I'm aiming at the broader audience. I'm not going to delve too far into that except to say that, well, actually that brings us right back to our ethical conversation, because we're really dealing with the issue of the biggie being that there's a common misconception by many traditionally religious people that people that do not believe in God, who are not sure about God, therefore have no morality. They have no ethics because there's no divine power telling them what to do. Well, and I'll be upfront, there was a time in my life I believed crap like that because it had been what I was taught, and the idea of punishment and reward was so sharply defined in my mind, I couldn't imagine how people motivate themselves who didn't have that. But as I got older, and I questioned more, I started to see something a little bit different and start to see how that there is a lot of complexity. And I started to see especially how that there's often intrinsic, well, basically, make a long story short, I met too many atheists and agnostics who are fundamentally good, decent human beings, who loved their friends, who loved their families, their communities, who did good, who didn't have the fear of damnation hanging over their heads as a motivator, who weren't necessarily ascribing to a great hereafter, a reincarnation, or a better life to come. They are focused on right here and now. And so my old beliefs had to give way to that reality, and that is that frankly, it did not seem like that theism, the belief in God, was necessarily essential to living a good life. And so that brings us to today's conversation, because I can say that, but for many people who are more traditionally religious, it's going to sound like mumble jumble. It's not going to make sense. How does it work? And how do religious humanists deal with ethical issues? And I will say it is tricky. And the temptation, I think, sometimes for any of us in life is, when it comes to philosophy, when it comes to theology, to simply not think about it, to not question how we make decisions. And back in my theological training, one of my professors said, you have a choice. You can study theology and hopefully develop good theology, or you can not study theology and have bad theology. But one way or the other, you have theology. Well, in the same way, I would say when it comes to philosophy, theology, anything else, I think that there is value in examining why we do what we do, not just going on autopilot. And so today, from this religious humanist perspective, again, we are people that deal with the big questions. We seek answers, we seek understanding, we seek to find commonality and connection, but we're doing it from this humanist perspective, at least in our communal sense. As individuals, we may approach it in lots of ways, but communally, we are looking at this humanistically. So how do ethical people, religious humanists, make these decisions? And also, I'm using these words ethics and morality like we all agree on what these terms are. The reality of it is the definitions are tricky. So I want to talk about that today. I want to pin down a little more about the definitions, what we mean by ethics, and then I want to discuss why ethics is important to our community and how we get there, and some ideas of how that might be applicable to the rest of humankind. So let's get started defining definitions. I should mention, coming into this broadcast, I had a really clearly formed idea. I thought I was going to paint a picture of ethics as being the common sense, practical ideas, the ways that we make decisions about what is right, what is wrong, how we live in this world. And I thought morality was this other thing that was defined by God or an authority figure. Yes, no, black, white. And the reality, when I went to the dictionary, I discovered that my definitions of these terms was much more muddied and incorrect, actually. And I started looking at these words in other contexts, and I realized that there's a fair bit of confusion here. So, dictionary-wise, and bear in mind the dictionary, when we use it, is reflecting where a majority of people were culturally, how they use words at a certain point in time. Doesn't mean it's the word used by everyone in every context every time. That makes it tricky. So in the dictionary, though, it basically states that ethics and morality are synonyms, meaning they basically mean the same thing. Now, the two words have different etymology, and I was going to read this part because this is interesting. Well, not read it, but the word ethics, its etymology is from the Greek word ethos, which means character or moral nature, while the word for morality comes from a Latin word mos, which means manner or custom. Essentially, these words mean the same thing. They come from two different languages, and the English language has a ton of these words that are from different etymologies, basically mean the same thing, but are slightly different. So the dictionary says these words are the same thing, except one of the dictionaries I looked at and other reference books talked about how they argued actually that I had it flipped around. My original understanding was actually the exact opposite, that some philosophers argue that ethics is the general abstraction of ideas of good and evil. Morality is the practical application, the exact opposite of how I heard it described. And then to even muddy the waters a little more, I think about the word ethics and how it's used legally. As an attorney, I'm bound by the professional rules of conduct. Those rules are discussed as being ethical rules. My wife, I've learned about her professional life. Being married to her, she's a physician. Physicians are governed by ethical rules. So if you look at what ethical rules are in these professions, they are hard and fast rules. Sometimes some of them aspirational, some of them very specific, but all of them are rules. You're not really challenged a whole lot to go beyond the rules. In fact, in law school, my legal ethics class drove me nuts because we just kept talking about the rules instead of what was right and what was wrong, of what was good for people or bad for people. That question never came up. It was all about the rules. Now, I learned that, unfortunately, you have to think that way as a lawyer if you want to stay out of trouble. Fundamentally, you have to look at the rules. That's the focus. But nonetheless, these words, ethics, morality, we use them over and over again. Different parts of society, culture, history use them over and over again, and we all mean different things by them. That is a problem. We're trying to define some key issues. And so today, I'm going to go back to my original definition, actually, with the understanding that the dictionary this is a muddy issue. The reason I'm choosing to do this is that at least for people like myself who grew up in a more conservative evangelical Christian background, the word ethics tended to have a more situational, fuzzier connotation, allowing the normal human realities to apply. Well, morality was black, right, black, white, yes, no, absolutes. And the idea is particularly these values came from on high, directed down to earth. And I myself see from this religious humanist perspective, my own perspective, that it's much better when we wrestle with things with our own heads and hearts. And so to me, that's how I'm using the word ethics. So that's what I'm doing with these terms. Just want to state up front my definition so we're all on the same page here. You understand what I'm saying. Okay, now I'm going to talk some about how ethics works in a religious humanist context, because we're not saying as a community that God came from on high and told us what was absolutely right and what was absolutely wrong. That's not the approach we're taking. What we're saying instead is that as human beings, we have capacity. We have the ability to understand, and therefore we should make competent decisions. The tricky thing, of course, is that life is complicated. It's not always easy to see what is right and wrong, so it's helpful if we have some kind of theoretical framework. And I would argue that possibly the best theoretical framework is a concept known as the Golden Rule. It comes from the religious world. And yet this concept comes up again and again and again in different contexts. In fact, I'm going to just share real quick a link on our Facebook Live page. And if any of you are watching, you have the computer in front of you, I'm going to encourage you to follow this link or to click through to this link, because I want for folks to see really what I'm talking about here in a very practical way, and to see how the Golden Rule has been restated and understood in so many different traditions. I'm looking at, this is the Wikipedia article on the Golden Rule, and I'm just looking at the table of contents. It talks about how that the concept, the idea, the maxim was stated in ancient Egypt, ancient India, ancient Greece, Persia, Rome, how in the religious context it comes up in the great Abrahamic religions, the Indian religions, East Asian religions, Iranian religions, new religious movements, traditional African religions, how it also comes up in a secular context, and in many ways is the foundation of our whole structure of human rights. It's pretty significant. But for myself, I think I'm going to deal with a little bit about the Golden Rule. Especially, I'm going to focus on it in the West, that we mostly are looking at least at first exposure, from a Judeo-Christian perspective. And so really there's two key figures here that deal with the issue of the Golden Rule. The first one, and I am going to see if I can share a link to this. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share just a link to an article about the person in question, and this was the great Rabbi Hillel. Now, Hillel, in the Jewish tradition, and he lived from around 110 BCE until 10 BCE, allegedly. Legend says he lived to be 120. Just between you and me, I think that's a bit doubtful. People rarely live that long today. I doubt they lived that long then. But anyway, that was the legend. Nonetheless, it's important to say that Hillel, in many ways, predated the time of Jesus. And a lot of what Jesus talked about was in his comments, his questions were from that framework of the world of Hillel. And the story goes that there's a lot of stories told about Hillel, but one of the great stories about him was, and by the way, in these stories, they almost always show two rabbis, Hillel and his adversary, his rival, Shammai. And sometimes the text, these texts tell these stories about Shammai and Hillel, show them more neutrally. Most of the time, though, Hillel comes off as the hero, and Shammai comes off looking like a fool. Well, one of these stories is that there is a non-Jew, a Gentile, a goyim, as they would say, came to these two rabbis and said, I'm willing to convert to your religion. And by the way, this is a common thing in the Greco-Roman world. Many converts were coming to Judaism at the time. But this guy, he's kind of being a bit of a punk, you could say. I can think of a few other words for him. But he says, I'm going to paraphrase the story in my Okie vernacular, as you say. I'm going to do it this way. This potential convert came first to Rabbi Shammai and said, Shammai, I'm interested in your religion, but I don't want to read all those books and do all this learning, so I'm going to give you a challenge. I'll convert to your religion if you can explain to me all of it while I'm standing on one foot. And by the way, I should mention the implication here is he can do it snappy. The rabbi can say in 30 seconds or less what the whole core of the teaching is. Well, what did Rabbi Shammai do? Well, Rabbi Shammai had this reputation of being a hothead, and this was no exception, because Rabbi Shammai did not choose the nonviolent approach to an annoying question. He chose violence. He hit the potential convert with a stick and drove him away. Wow. That was Rabbi Shammai. Well, Rabbi Hillel, he took a different approach. Just asked the same question, and I'm sure the questioner at this point was thinking about, okay, we'll be ready to run if Hillel hits me too. But this time, Hillel, he took a different approach. He said, sure, I'm up for it. And then, again, my paraphrase of what he said, Hillel said, look, just think about this. If someone does something bad to you, how does it make... Sorry, I'm being too creative here. Basically, what Hillel said was, don't do to other people what you wouldn't want done to you. And everything else beyond this is all commentary. Now go learn the commentary. Basically, what Hillel is saying that all of the principles, all the ideas of religion and ethics all hinge upon this one concept. Everything else, Hillel, by saying go study at the end, was implying that this stuff is important, but he was also making it clear is it really is commentary on the first principle. Jesus says the same thing a generation later when he said, do unto others you'd have them do unto you. It's a positive statement of wanting what you'd want something else to have, someone else to have. Hillel stated it negatively. They both are really fundamentally the same thing. Treat people the way that if you were in their shoes, they'd want to be treated. But it's been many others have talked about this idea. And there's a lot of people we could talk about here, and certainly all the world religions, there's many, but I wanted today to talk about one in particular. And let me pull this up real quick because this didn't come up the way I wanted it to. This thing I was going to read. Okay. A later person who theorized a little bit on this was took it to the next level was a Russian anarchist by the name of Peter Kropotkin. Now, I've heard Kropotkin's name many times before from folks more versed than I am in anarchist theory, but I hadn't read him directly until very recently, and I've realized that he really has a lot to bear on some of these questions. By the way, the little short nutshell version of his life was he was born in the 1800s in the midst of a lot of the turmoil of the time. He was an advocate for human rights and for change from an anarchist perspective. He was, much of his life was spent either in prison or in exile. He finally came back to Russia late in life to come to the Russian Revolution, but really was pretty disillusioned by what the revolution had become, and had died pretty early in the days of those first few years of the Russian Revolution. Kropotkin, though, was also prolific. He wrote a lot. He really articulated some ideas about what it really means, how evolution bears on ethical understandings. Kropotkin, his basic premise was, and he was really, I think, oddly prophetic in his foresight, because today, in the understandings of evolution, we all know about survival of the fittest, the idea that all organisms are competing for resources, competing against each other, seeking to reproduce and to dominate, and that this is what drives evolution. Well, recently, quite a few scientists have said, well, that's only part of the story. There's also the component not just of competition, but cooperation. Sometimes among individual organisms of a species, sometimes across species lines, where you have these organisms have developed these mutual adaptations to each other, so that together they thrive, apart they die. Kropotkin, though, was talking about this a long time before, and he was arguing that an understanding of evolution could be driven by the idea that human beings have thrived when they've cooperated. Human beings have not done well during times of war and stress. Kropotkin, much of his argument of seeking a better kind of society was rooted in this. And I'm going to read this idea of I'm going to read a little bit from this Wikipedia article because it just really nails some good stuff here. This is the article on ethics, and it's the part on anarchist ethics. So again, we'll share this link real quick for anyone who wants to read this directly. I'm going to read this, and we'll talk about it a little bit. Anarchist ethics is an ethical theory based on the studies of anarchist thinkers. The biggest contributor to the anarchist ethics is the Russian zoologist, geographer, economist, and political activist Peter Kropotkin. Starting from the premise that the goal of ethical philosophy should be to help humans adapt and thrive in evolutionary terms, Kropotkin's ethical framework uses biology and anthropology as a basis in order to scientifically establish what will best enable a given social order to thrive biologically and socially, and advocates certain behavioral practices to enhance humanity's capacity for freedom and well-being, namely practices which emphasize solidarity, equality, and justice. Kropotkin argues that ethics itself is evolutionary and is inherited as a sort of social instinct through cultural history. And by so, he rejects any religious and transcendental explanation of morality. The origin of ethical feeling in both animals and humans can be found, he claims, in the natural fact of sociality. also known as mutualistic symbiosis, which humans can then combine with the instinct for justice or equality, and then with the practice of reason to construct a non-supernatural and anarchistic system of ethics. Kropotkin suggests that the principle of equality at the core of anarchism is the same as the Golden Rule. Okay, now I'm quoting from a translation of Kropotkin. This principle of treating others as one wishes to be treated oneself. What is it but the very same principle as equality, the fundamental principle of anarchism? And how can anyone manage to believe himself an anarchist unless he practices it? We do not wish to be ruled, and by this very fact, do we not declare that we ourselves wish to rule nobody? We do not wish to be deceived. We wish always to be told nothing but the truth. And by this very fact, do we not declare that we ourselves do not wish to deceive anybody? That we promise to always tell the truth, nothing but the truth, the whole truth? We do not wish to have the fruits of our labor stolen from us. And by that very fact, do we not declare that we respect the fruits of others' labor? But what right, indeed, can we demand that we should be treated in one fashion, reserving to ourselves to treat others in a fashion entirely different? Our sense of equality revolts at such an idea. Bam! To me, he nails it, because he really makes it clear that what this Golden Rule principle about is, it's about the idea of solidarity. It's about us putting ourselves in the other's shoes. And Kropotkin, by the way, he talks a lot more at other places about this idea of mutual aid, very closely tied to this. And mutual aid is the idea of people taking care of each other in a mutual, reciprocal way. It's very different than charity. Charity is when I give to you because you're needy. Note the power dynamic here. It's the giver, the giving. In mutual aid, it's something different. It is, I'm giving you to you today. You're going to give to me tomorrow, and I'm going to receive tomorrow. It's this, again, reciprocal relationship that's rooted in respect, that's rooted in this belief in equality. And so I think that Kropotkin, what he's proposing here is something that could be a revolutionary force. And if we look at the issue of government itself, what is it at the end based on? At its best moments of cooperation, of working together, in its worst moments, compulsion, coercion, war. And so the question is, what can we do to effectuate a different kind of how things could be? I think Kropotkin gets us started on this. And we could talk a lot more about this, but I want to maybe to kind of bring this all around, I would argue from this humanist perspective, human-centered perspective, what we can say about this idea is that it is giving us the ability to make difficult choices and at least have a framework to start from, and one that remains rooted in human solidarity. That's rooted in the belief that if I value myself, then I consequently value you. And by the way, you flip that around, it's also true. If I don't love myself, it's going to be very hard for me to love someone else. So again, it's rooted in, ideally, positively, it is love, protection, support, security, wellness of me as an individual, but then that me becomes us when we tear down the wall between me and you, or me and them, or worst, me and it, or those. In other words, when we start to dehumanize, we deny even the humanity of those on the other side. This also is a good point to connect with another author, Wendell Berry. Wendell Berry, famous agrarian author, incredible writer, can't say enough about his stuff. But he talks a lot about the idea of how that it's easy to oppress people we don't know. It's hard to oppress people we do know. In other words, most people are polite and kind in their daily interactions, at least tolerably so, because we have to see people face to face. If we behave like jerks, makes us feel bad about ourselves. We feel guilty. But how many people chew out someone on the phone who treats them crummy? I have. A lot of us have. It's easy. We're not seeing them. And how often is it easy to mistreat people we can't even hear? And before you say, oh, I'm not a slumlord, I'm not a big businessman, I want to challenge you to say, where do the clothes we wear come from? The foods that we eat. You need people that make those things, that produce those things for us, to give us the status of life we have, are not paid appropriately. And yet, you and I and everyone else in the society, we continue to participate in the society, spending to the hilt. And at the end of the day, not caring so much about the people we can't see, the people we don't hear. And so I think Wendell is onto something. And one of the ethical challenges for us is it's easy to say, do unto others, you'd have them do unto you, but we're not being fully aware of how big our life is. And again, I'm particularly speaking to those of us who are watching this live via the internet or watching it recorded later. Already, by the fact that we're online, we are at a different social status than many other people on planet Earth. And I think that we have a greater responsibility because the purchases we make, the ways we live our lives affects many, many, many more people. And so that's the challenge here. So coming back to our first question, way back about 20 minutes ago, about ethics for religious humanists. Well, I would argue, like all human beings, a great starting place is the Golden Rule. But then we need to take it beyond just those people we see, but to also look at how our life affects many others and how we're interconnected. And the more we can simplify our life, there's some value to that. There's also value sometimes into saying, in the life that I'm living, in the complex ways I interact with others, what can I do to make things a little better for others? One last word I'm going to have on this is I'm going to talk a little bit about personalism, an idea that the Catholic Worker talked about, I believe, several others I know I've talked about, but I think about mostly Peter Maurin and Dorothy Day of the Catholic Worker movement. And their argument is that charity shouldn't be left in the hands of bureaucrats, of those far away, because it separates us from them. It undermines the role of human solidarity. Her argument is we need to be more personally engaged in helping to alleviate wrongs, that we need to be directly engaged, and that there's something valuable about that. Now, theoretically, I can see the value of both kinds of work and both kinds of activism. But I think from a interpersonal, spiritual standpoint, I do think there's value in that practice of seeking to lower the walls between us and them, me, you. The more we can make it us and it being an inclusive us, the better. So that's my starting point. What I'd say, what religious humanists have on the ethical table. And I think the good news is it's something that all human beings can have and should have. And so I think maybe our role in this is to live out these principles, but also to encourage those around us to look for these principles in their traditions and to seek to find the common human commonality and to seek to live out the world as it could be. You know, I mean, think about John Lennon's Imagine song. We've heard it a million times. It's become cliche, and yet the words, I think, are still very profound and meaningful to say, can you imagine what it could be like? Well, think about this. What do you imagine? What do you dream of? How could the world be? How could the walls be brought down? And yes, sometimes they are literal walls made of concrete and steel separating people from others. Sometimes it's socioeconomics and history and culture, prejudice. There's a lot of things that separate us. But what can we do to bring down walls and to connect with each other? So that's what I'm going to leave us with for the inspiration part of our webcast. This is a good... Okay, now I want to talk about our next topic for tonight. And this is, we have inspiration, information, interaction. So on the information front, I have two things to share. First of all, again, I want to mention, say thank you and welcome to everyone who might be tuning in from Courage to Resist, all the supporters who may have heard about us from there. Just want to thank you all for tuning in. Do want to mention a few things that right now Courage to Resist is doing. One of the biggies is that Courage to Resist and us at the Objector Church are working hard on establishing this Objector Registry, a registry that anyone who wants to preserve what they believe about war can sign up, can go through a process to help document their views long before war is called. And so there's information about that at our website, objector.church, but also on the Courage to Resist website, couragetoresist.org. A lot of other stuff going on, especially some work in being prepared for what may be to come with regards to issues at the border. So there's a lot of good stuff happening right now on the website. So anyway, there's that. Also want to mention that I'm in the process of converting over all of our past content from the Objector Church meetups into audio format. I have 3 of the episodes done, got a few more to go, but we will have those up very soon as part of podcasts. So it'll be a week or 2 before everything gets the editing done and everything gets posted up to the different web podcast services. But once that is up, I would really like everyone's help in getting the word out about these podcasts. One of the nice things about the podcast as compared to the videos is that a lot of us may not have time to watch a computer screen or watch a TV or phone screen. We might have time to listen to something while we drive to work, or while we ride our bike, or while we are at work. There's a lot of places we might have time to listen to something. And so we now have, I think, over a dozen different live webcasts. We have several episodes of the Tao Te Ching podcast with myself and Zach Gleason. We have some episodes of a class on the Psalms. All of these and a lot more resources are coming through the Objector Church and our organization, the Objector Institute, that does the educational side of things. So there's lots of good stuff coming to be coming in podcast form as well. We're really wanting to build this audience up because we just need a chance to interact with a lot more people. So if you have a chance, give it a few days. I'll be posting on the Objector Church website information on how to access the podcast through various apps. In fact, what I'm going to do now, just for fun, for any of you that, let's see here, what's there? What I'm going to do is for any of y'all that are watching, even though this is not the program, the podcasts are not yet showing up in the podcast, the Google directory and whatnot. They are, though, available if you have the programs already set up. So I'm going to just post in real quick the RSS feed, and this will be useful to anyone who's has an RSS reader, podcast software. Well, this is just a link right now for the 3 episodes that we've done of Objector Church weekly podcasts. Anyway, eventually all of our programming will be there as well in audio format. And I'm hoping from the get-go here on out, we'll be doing these, hopefully having the recorded version in video and audio up each week, just a few days at the latest afterwards. So anyway, but if anyone want to test this out, I would love for you to test it out and send me comments. I need help. Especially one of the things I want to find out too is from our viewers or listeners what do you think of the intro, the ending pieces, things like that. So please listen to the podcast, give us your input. You can send that to me at james@objector.church. Oh, by the way, I did get one really important notice from Jeff Patterson. He's the executive director of Courage to Resist and is also one of my fellow ministers here with the Objector Church. And Jeff just posted, we've had the first 100 people sign up for the Objector Registry over the last couple of days. Hope to get feedback on ways to improve, etc. That is tremendous. I think it's been a long time since we've had 100 people in this country state for the record that they are conscious objectors and begin the process of documenting their beliefs. I don't want to overstate this, but I can't help but think this is huge, and it can be much, much, much bigger. We need to get the word out to young people, yes, but to many others, men and women. Given the state of the law, it's almost certain when the draft comes, it will be women too. Definitely late teens, teenagers, and young adults, early 20s for sure, maybe at risk is for cannon fodder, but much older possibly for the technical skills draft, the high likelihood that people with tech skills, IT skills, engineering skills, skills in medicine and law, these people are also very much at risk of being drafted. And so we encourage you, whatever you think, even if you think it's a stretch that war will never come, well, war is here already, been here for a long time, but even if you don't think the draft would come, you never know. Secondly, the more people that sign this, the more it sends a message to the powers that be that you can't make us go to the kind of war where you're forcing a whole country to fight whether you want to or not. In fact, we want to get to the big ethical questions we were talking about a moment ago about these golden rule principles. What can we really say about that and apply in the issue of war? Well, think about this. War always involves people who are being told by the government, by some other higher authority, that they must kill. But of the people that they are killing, have they actually hurt them? Rarely, if ever. In other words, war is different than personal defense. If a bad guy comes to your home and tries to break in and you use force to fight them off, if you use force to protect yourself or your family in some kind of interpersonal situation, it may be a sad thing, but it is right there in front of you. In other words, you're stopping someone from committing an act of violence against yourself or someone else. But war, what does it have to do with this? War is something different. War is not when you've been hurt and you protect yourself, or you're at risk of being hurt and you protect yourself. Rather, it's when a government says, we're going to tell you who to hurt. Even though the individuals on the other side haven't hurt anyone, haven't hurt you, we're going to instead tell you not only to hurt them, not only to restrain them, but you are to kill them, to shoot pieces of molten lead so they will hit their heads and their heads will explode. To not be too gross about it, that's what the war is about. It's when the government says, yes, we're going to drop burning jolly gasoline on German cities. Completely A-okay. We're going to drop nuclear weapons on Japan. That's what war is. War is about when those in authority tell the little people, you and I, the nobodies in the real sense of the word, that we have to fight, not because we've been hurt, but because our government's offended by something another government did. Well, we have the chance at this moment in time to put it on record that we say no, that we will not submit to manufactured hatred. We will not submit to having the government tell us who that we are supposed to murder. No. The answer is no. And we need to put it on the record. And so I encourage you, go to the Objector Church website. Please do it. Objector.church. And on that page, let me double check on the, I believe it's objector.church/register, but let me double check that. Yes. The registry is at objector.church/registry. Please do it today. It's important. I will encourage you, anyone out there, if you know young people, you know people of any age who haven't thought through these issues, encourage them to visit this website. Besides, of course, the registry form itself is also information about war, about conscience, a lot of stuff there, and a good starting point for further inquiry on these issues. So please do what you can to help us get the word out. It will really mean a lot to us. Well, let's see. I'm going to check back for our Facebook page. See anything else? We have any other comments? Not seeing anything. So I want to guess this would be a great place to, last things I'll just mention again. Always love comments. Email james@objector.church. Look for us on social media. And finally, of course, again, we'd love to get folks to check out our podcast. So I'm real quick while I'm on here, I am going to I'm also going to share the two links for the other podcasts. Let's see here. And these are the ones done by the Objector Institute. One is called Experiencing Tao, and one is called A Daily Psalm. And so just sharing these, if any of you are podcast enthusiasts, would love to get your comments. Probably our best produced ones are the webcast, but with the Experiencing Tao, I like it too. So anyway, and we should have those up very soon in the different podcast directories. So anyway, we're going to leave you for this week. Next week, same time, same place. And again, thank you so much for tuning in. We do appreciate it. Bye now.